Talking Memphis Wrestling with Randy Hales is now streaming live on Fun Media at fun927.com and is always on Facebook, YouTube, X, Twitch, and at tv5wrestling.com.
Talking Memphis Wrestling with Randy Hales and special guests.
We're live can be, from the hometown of me, Randy Hales, the owner, founder, president of Power Pro Wrestling. Hey, everybody, what in the world is going on? This is the June 16th edition of Talking Memphis Wrestling, and right now, ORH is so low in the room by myself. Adam in another state producing this show, and he is being called out. Adam is, or saying hello to, as my buddy Frank Seaton says hello to Adam Dunn and to myself. Richard Hood is in the house. Greg Wayne, who we don't see much. Greg in the house. My best friend, my brother from another mother, the greatest video cameraman producer the USWA and CWA ever had, Randy Dandy, Randy West, also known as Eddie Marlin's son-in-law, Diane Marlin West's husband. Again, Randy West, my best friend. And again, I always say he's a brother to me. He is watching this show tonight from Hendersonville, Tennessee. Now, I'll real quick make this announcement. We might even have a graphic set up, a caption set up for next week's show. I will tell you what you're going to see on next week's program, and we will show that. We will also be talking about the show that we will have tonight that I'm really excited about. Next week, the suggestion by Randy West, and he suggested ideas for upcoming shows, and we will do it next week. Next week on Talking Memphis Wrestling, Adam, what we're going to do, hey, Team Hales, what we're going to do, as suggested by the great Randy West, is to take a look at the biggest nights in Memphis wrestling history, the big events starting in the 50s. We'll go all the way with the biggest shows of Power Pro Wrestling. We'll cover a lot of territory. Really exciting about putting that show together. Thanks to Randy West, we got a big one next week. Also, I wanted to let everybody know that coming up in July the 7th, on a Tuesday night, a 7-episode series for Dark Side of the Ring. That's on Tuesday night. So effective on July the 7th on a Tuesday night, I'll be watching Vice TV. And for about 5 weeks in a row, 6 weeks in a row, there will not be shows on Tuesday nights because we will want to review the Dark Side of the Ring, and we will do that on Wednesdays. So effective, as you see, coming up on Dark Side of the Ring. It premieres July the 7th with a 2-hour feature on Jeff Jarrett and TNA Wrestling. This is great because on these Dark Side of the Rings, it's always great. It's always interesting. It's always entertaining. There is no doubt in the world about it. Always excited about it, especially when it hits home. When it hits home, Calvin Lindsay, and we will be talking about it every week on Talking Memphis Wrestling. Now, very interesting subject that we will talk about today on Talking Memphis Wrestling. Very interesting subject. We will talk about a topic that I'm passionate for, a job that I'm passionate for, a passion that I've had for many, many years, more than that, many, many decades. We will talk about the heart and soul of Memphis wrestling, heart and soul of any wrestling, any territory wrestling. They may call it writers now. I never wrote nothing in my life. We call it booking. And we will talk about the booking of Memphis wrestling and other places. We'll try to deep dive and get in tune with that in great details. Pat, I'm sure, along with Michael, who will be with me as part of the panel today, they will have some great questions and great insights as we talk great bookers. And we're just going to get into a great deep dive into that and very excited about it. We want to do first take time as it's 7:06 on the 16th day of June. We'll start out from Birmingham, Alabama. I am assuming he was the first person in the room. I was the first person in the room. Adam was the second person in the room. And now we'll go first take time as Rob helped my buddy, lawyer buddy. He is in the house. I, the watcher, is watching today. And Pat Trammell, we talked on the phone yesterday. I had a great Uber ride yesterday to Russellville, Arkansas, saw a beautiful lake. Today went to Memphis, crossed the bridge into Tennessee. A great trip there. Everything's good with me. Hope things are good with you. Good evening. What's going on?
Well, let me try to get back on here. Let's see what I'm doing. My apologies. Huh?
You are on.
I can't see myself, though.
I can see you, and you look as handsome as ever.
Okay, hold on just a second.
And as Pat went away, we want to go to Arab, Alabama. No dead time right now. And want to bring in the 2024 Hall of Fame winner. I can't think of the granddaughter's name. He is the proud grandpa of our buddy Joshua and a new grandpa of a pretty little girl. And he'll tell us all about it. He's looking dapper. He's looking fired up. He is here on this show as we talk about bookers today. But right now, we're going to talk about anything Michael St. John wants to talk about in his first take. Go to it.
Bookers? I thought we were talking about hookers.
We can do that too if you want to. That's fine with me.
I know a lot of wrestlers that know them. I know that. Hey, everybody. Thank you. Daughter's name. It's easy to remember, Andy. Say, hey, Alexa, when you talk to your Alexis. She's Alexis.
Joshua told me that last week.
Yeah, Alexis. So anyway,
is he there?
Well, no. They'll be over tomorrow. But it's wonderful. It's wonderful to have grandchildren. But Joshua, as you well know, is sort of connected at the hip to me, and that's the way it is. I have actually held our new granddaughter a total of about 3 minutes.
That's all.
My wife has held our new granddaughter a total of about 3 days. So that's sort of where we're sitting with that. Melanie's got her connection already strong with Alexis, and you can already tell when her grandmother picks her up, the little girl, her little guys recognize what that's about. But I have to be very careful because I don't want Joshua to get upset, and so I will hold him. But anytime that I've held the baby, he's always come next to me and sat down. Like, okay, well, you can hold the baby, but I'm going to be right here, which is pretty cool. So we're getting through those learning situations. Had a great conversation today with our good friend Bo James, who is running shows now in North Alabama. Had a good success the other night up in Rogersville, Alabama. Despite flooded conditions, they had a good crowd and have been invited back. A good fundraiser for the basketball program there at Lauderdale County High School. And the big event coming up in Huntsville next Friday night, Fun Radio, of course, being a part of it. We're giving away tickets.
I thought that was Florence Friday night. Adam should
Florence is this Friday night. Huntsville is next Friday night. Yes, sir.
We'll go ahead and put up the poster of which I think is the next to last, or maybe even the last poster we have up there on the pictures, Adam. If we can go ahead, and because Bo will do like he did last week, he'll get all hot and bothered if we don't talk about it right now. And here's Michael St. John to do the promo for this event in Florence.
This will be in Florence on Friday night. This is at the Singing River Brewing Company over on College Street in Florence. That's a neat little place, by the way. Don't think of it as a bar. It's not. It's an entertainment place. They just happen to be a brewing company. But they have a great entertainment venue there, and a big card of action is there. And by the way, I don't know if you got them, Randy, but Bo sent me the pictures of the new championship belts for for Southern States Wrestling, including the new Alabama belt, which is a throwback to the original Alabama championship belt of the 60s and 70s, and it really looks good. But big event coming up, Rumble on the River, Friday night in Florence. And, of course, a week from Friday night at the JC Arena, the JC building on Airport Road in Huntsville, the site of many a great wrestling match over the past 3 or 4 decades once the Coliseum closed. Great building, air-conditioned, and should be a good crowd for Huntsville coming up a week from Friday. So congratulations to Bo. But in the meantime, in between time, great to see Pat on screen and him back in town. In fact, I'm going to issue an invitation to Pat to come up early on a week from Friday night. And let me take you to dinner, and then we'll go to the wrestling match and see what Bo has to put on at the JC building, if you can.
All right. We're going to try to make that happen. Randy, I'm sorry I popped off earlier. I've had some issues getting up, and I was actually a little bit under the weather, so I'm going to hang on tonight as long as I can. I'm really excited, particularly excited about tonight's topic.
Going to be a good one. Okay, Randy, let's get into the Bookers.
Okay, your mind's in a gutter. I wanted to give Pat the opportunity for a first take.
Not much first take tonight. Again, I'm a little bit under the weather, and am actually, particularly, as I said, excited about what we're talking about tonight, because it's been, I think, for most of us casual wrestling fans, you're the wizard behind you and the other bookers are the wizard behind the curtain. And we want to see where the magic is made.
It'll be good. Michael, do you have any additional comments for your first take before we get into this thing?
Not really, but I do think we ought to start out the show, if you would, if I can just jump ahead a little bit, in explaining to the audience the difference between a promoter and a booker, and that some promoters were bookers and vice versa.
And that is true, and we'll get deep diving into that earlier for the thing. Alexander said he paid, that has nothing to do with the subject we're talking about, and I'm not going to expand on that right now. Let's stick with the subjects. We did a rant about that last week. If you comment, talk about the subject, which is booking or whatever we're talking about, and then toward the end of the show, if we can, we'll catch up. PJ says hello to all of us, and this we appreciate that very much. I also want to say that lately, man, we've been on a rock and roll. We've been on a roll. We've done great lately. The last several weeks have been great. Started with the Phil Hickerson show. That was tremendous. We had a show that Tony Richards joined us last week with the great announcers, the Mount Rushmore. And today we will talk about bookers. Before we get into the booking thing, I want to also once again say that starting on July the 7th, it'll be a couple of weeks, and then for about 6 weeks in a row, there will not be a Talking Memphis Wrestling on Tuesday for about 6 weeks in a row. We will move to Wednesday, starting the 7th of July, or the 8th of July will be a Wednesday show. The reason for that is premiering on the 7th, and Adam, I want you to go through all these slides. Dark Side of the Ring will premiere on Vice TV. The season starts July the 7th with a 2-hour feature on our friend, the great Double J Jeff Jarrett, also the TNA Jeff Jarrett story. These shows sometimes are heartbreaking. They're always great. And this season we'll start with that Jeff Jarrett 3-part premiere, because the first night on the 7th will be a 2-parter that night. 2-hour 2-parter on the 7th. The following Tuesday will be the 3rd part. So it will be the Jeff Jarrett's episode. Then something that I don't know much about, especially this Necro Butcher and Samoa Joe, a vicious, crazy, bloody, dangerous match that took place at the ECW Arena. Also a feature on the Big Boss Man, the Renegade, Paul Orndorff, Missy Hyatt, and a one-legged wrestler, Zach Gowen. I am interested in 3 episodes, and that is the Jeff Jarrett episode, but we'll cover that certainly on Wednesday, the day after the thing. Pat, your thoughts on that lineup?
Well, yeah, there is some interesting stuff there. That show, I think, is particularly well done, and I'm excited to see, what they do with Jeff. I've read about the history of TNA in Jerry's book, and he and I talked about it a good bit because we had a mutual acquaintance in Richard Scrushy, who left him high and dry, as he did most of Birmingham. But anyway, I'm excited to see see the show on that. Now, I will point out TNA is, I guess, the second oldest wrestling promotion still on TV.
And it was created by Jerry and Jeff Jarrett. Man, this will be a great deal. Fantastic. And when talking about Michael, about Jeff, if you look at that, his career in his life had so many successes, but a lot of heartbreak. His first wife, Jill, I was there, went to see her because we were friends, and I was living in Poplar Bluff, Missouri, and I went to Nashville and went to the hospital to see her and talk to Jeff and Jill's parents, the Gregory's, so all that stuff. Just she was a wonderful lady, and at the time they had 2 young daughters, and they at this point they had the 3rd, and she was basically baby lost that, and he's been open talking about that, and it's going to be a tear jerker. Be prepared, people, but wait to the end, because close to 60 years old, he has remarried, great family, into all kinds of stuff. He's also had substance abuse issues and drinking issues and all that. I'm sure they'll deal with, but at the end of the day is the end of the day. And the Jeff Jarrett story is what it is, because, and also I think you have to say, he had a major falling out, a family squabble where he wasn't talking to his dad for many, 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 many years. When he went to rehab later on, he dealt with issues of his childhood, issues that resulted in issues in drinking and that sort of thing. Went to rehab, and they said, hey, you have to make amends for all you did and the people that you've had issues with. And once he got back, he reached out to his dad, and his dad was agreeable to it. And then the last several years of Jerry Jarrett's life, thank God, he had a great relationship with Jeff, better than the other kids, and I think that is fantastic. So I'm really excited about the Jeff Jarrett episode. Of course, the Missy Hyatt episode, because I knew her, will be interesting as well. But this Jeff Jarrett studio, not only could story, Michael, could it be a book? It could be a full-length motion picture with the ups and downs of his life. Are you looking forward to it? And I want to say, before I let you talk, I figured out I always had to depend on Al Tuttle to send me links, that sort of thing. I have on my smart TV, Tubi TV or Tuba TV, Tubi TV,
Tubi.
TV, and that airs Vice. I've already figured it out. I've found it. I can be in front of the big TV and watch that every week. Again, we're moving to Wednesday. I did that, by the way, without sharing that with you guys. If you read my notes, which some of you do and some of you don't. By the way, Jerry Jarrett has Jeff, has Jennifer, and has Jason. He also, with another marriage, has Jerry Jr., and that was his kids, Richard. And again, we are, when it's about the subject, I will try to, if I can, get with that. What a story, Michael. First of all, are you interested in any of the other stories that they're covering, and how fired up are you about the Jeff Jarrett TNA story?
I think it shows how important Jeff is to the history of wrestling, both then and now, that they're doing 3 episodes to shake it all out, because this is the first person or the first group that Vice has never done more than 1 week on. So I think it's a testament to the Jarretts. I think it's a testament to Jeff. I think it's going to be an extremely interesting and eye-opening subject for a lot of people. I had the honor to call Jeff's first match. And Jeff's one of my favorite people in the business ever. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. So I'm very much looking forward to it, and I think that is sort of the shining star of this season. I'm a little disappointed in the lineup of the rest of the shows. I don't have a lot of interest in half of them.
I think the Missy High one could be good. I think Big Boss Man. I think Paul Orndorff. As I really don't care about the Necro Butcher and Samoa Joe.
I don't care about Zach Gowen. I mean, he was a flash in the pan. Orndorff, he has a story, but, I guess they'll get into some of the stuff that happened later in his career. I'm not familiar with the Renegade. Big Boss Man, only because of his connection with Atlanta and TBS, did I ever get to see him. Never worked with him. Necro Butcher and Samoa Joe. I saw the show. I saw the match, and it's blood and guts. And Samoa Joe is. I think Samoa Joe is someone or a wrestler that is an acquired taste, is the best way I can put it. I worked with him in Wrestle Birmingham when Linda Marks booked him, and he was young then and pretty cocky. And that was about the time that the Necro Butcher thing came up, because he went up to ECW to do the shows. And I don't know. And plus, is it just me, or is this particular series of Dark Side later in the year than it normally is? Because I always thought it was March and April.
I can't answer that. Pat, do you remember?
It's interesting you say that, Michael, because when Randy popped that up, and we had communicated today that Jeff was going to be on there. I just remember thinking, are they still doing though? Because I don't think in my mind, it's been 2 years.
They did some last year, but I'm like you. And no offense, but that's a subject that when the first couple of years, there's a lot to talk about. I mean, we all know this business, the radio business, and any business like this has a dark side to it. So the subject matter, I think, was just the playing field was wide open. It was fallow ground. Now they're like, this is year 7 or series 7 of it. And now you're starting to pick up the pieces of this stuff. Have they done one on Sherry Martel? I can't remember.
Not sure, because I can't watch the thing. Certainly I've watched video of the most heartbreaking one of them all was the Owen Hart episode. Oh, yeah. They've been good episodes that Al has sent me, and I'm really excited about it in the past. And I would think, Pat, that for them to have this 7th season or whatever it is, that they must be some interest there. They must, and on that Vice network, obviously it's one of their most frequent, one of their biggest hits they've ever done.
Yeah, I think so, and I agree. I mean, I like the show fine. I mean, I think I think it started chronologically, and I think it started kind of chronologically. So for me, the people that I was interested in watching, they showed first. And I do think somebody commented he thought they had done one on Sherry, and I thought they had too,
Yeah,
or
I may have been one of
somebody
those.
did,
Yeah.
because she
And they
died
take
here in Birmingham.
Yes, in fact, that's one of the reasons I bring it up. I know she was living out in the East Lake Huffman area the last time I had talked to her before her passing, and I think she was an outstanding athlete in our business as a female, and really broke a lot of barriers and did a lot of things that women had not done to that point in professional wrestling. So, and that's all off the subject of this, but I just sort of feel like that they're grabbing now. They're like, well, let's try this or let's try that. There have been a lot of spinoffs. So there's a dark side of the NFL. There's a dark side of this. They've done dark side of everything but the moon.
Yeah.
And I think Pink Floyd did that.
We need to see that before. Just with Jeff, Pat, the interesting thing, I first met him probably, funny story, I was close to Eddie Marlin and also with Jerry Jarrett, just a young, and I'm about 5 years older than Jeff, but I was the go-to guy in Jonesboro, and somebody came and got me, and they said, hey, there's a guy wanting to come in, says he's Jerry Jarrett's son. Well, at that part, I could have got heated on myself on this kind of thing. I was close to Eddie, close to everybody. I knew Jerry Jarrett had Jerry Jr. I knew Jennifer. I knew Jace. I knew of them all. I'd never heard of a Jeff at all. Jeff and Jeff's mother and dad divorced many, many moons ago, but so he showed up. He was at a basketball tournament in Jonesboro, and so he went up there, and I'm thinking that it'd be Jerry Jr. or who I'd never met, or be Jason. I knew it was a guy. I went up there, and he looked like Jerry, blonde headed and athletic looking, and all that, smaller, but I just gave him the 5th degree, and finally in the thing he said, yes, I don't live with my dad, I live with my mom, and that explained it. But if I'd have kicked him out of the building, I probably wouldn't be telling the story today, Pat, about my booking run. That would have never happened.
Yeah, well, maybe not. I mean, I'm not going to speak too much out of school here, but Jerry had up and down relationships with all his kids.
Yes,
all the boys anyway.
And
that's a good point.
Yeah, that's human nature, Michael. Families can be explosive, right?
Hey, I've got a situation. I have a son that I haven't spoken to, and when I did see him in November, he basically threw me out. So, I mean, it happens. And whether it comes around or that'll just depend on the circumstances. But, who knows? But I do think that the dark side of the ring, let's see how this season plays out, because I think there's a question, will there be another season? And then I think the other question is, if there is another season, they're going to have to pump it up, because this is not an A-list lineup. You take away the Jerry Jarrett and the Missy Hyatt, and it ain't an A-list lineup.
No, not at all.
Why don't we do a inside Memphis Wrestling thing? You can find us you guys can find us some TV guys.
Now, I could do a dark side of Memphis Wrestling, but it would probably also be shot, Pat.
Well, I'm not saying necessarily dark side, but I mean, I think there's 30 people in Memphis Wrestling, and we do it every week. So, I mean, we could do it on TV, or do it as a TV show, or do it as this. That would be worth a half an hour.
Well, and the other thing on that is I've got TVs, I've got LG TVs, I got Samsung TVs. They all have these networks now, or I call them networks, and there's like 1,000 of them. And the subject matter is, in fact, right now over here on this screen, I'm watching a subject matter of it's called Cityscapes, and it's Amsterdam. And I've never been to Amsterdam. It looks interesting, but I mean, they do a half an hour on different cities. And
good heroin in Amsterdam.
Oh, is there?
Oh yeah. You got to go to Amsterdam to get the heroin.
Well, if I did, I'd never try it. And if I did, I'd probably try to sell it and even get shot. So anyway, but no, I mean, there's so many, and there's such a glut of channels, but there's such a need for programming.
That's
And
exactly
these
right.
channels are like giving these people shots at. So I think Inside Memphis Wrestling on a TV channel would be awesome. I think it's a great idea.
I thought the show that Dwayne Johnson did about the territories was especially good,
I thought so too.
and
I
Memphis
thought
being
so
the
too.
first one.
Randy West, our good friend, the great producer and cameraman. Today we communicated back and forth with text message, and Randy watches every Talking Memphis Wrestling, and he had his producer hat on, and we do have a caption, the very first caption that talks about next week's Talking Memphis Wrestling. And guys, you have a week to talk, to think about, and to research. And our topic next week will be the biggest nights in Memphis wrestling history. It might be Spuddy Monroe and Billy Wicks at Russellwood Park. It might be the first sellout at the Mid-South Coliseum. It could be the Lawler Dundee Loser Leave Town match in '83. It could be the Power Pro blast off of the Dome, or Star Spangled, the 4th of July night on the river in Memphis. So that'll be a great topic to talk about. So you guys put your thinking caps on, and I'll do the research and get it formatted. Really looking forward to next Tuesday night. Now, if you real quick go with me, Adam, full screen. There's so much talk in the last, since the age. I'll get on a rant and a rave now, because the worst thing that could happen in wrestling was when Dave Meltzer smartened everybody up with the Wrestling Observer. I can tell you, as a paying customer, wrestling was better. Wrestling was 100% better when you didn't know what a booker was, when you didn't know what heat is, when you didn't know what a comeback is, all the stuff that you read. And now we're guilty talking the inside of wrestling, and we're guilty because the world is smartened up. So finally, I've learned my lesson when Jerry Jarrett started doing a podcast, because Eddie Marlin, when he heard my podcast, got mad at me. He said, "You're smart enough." And I had to on my phone find the Jerry Jarrett thing. I said, "This guy's, your son-in-law has been doing this for a year." And then Eddie kind of wised up to it. So people might be smart now, but not really smart. Doesn't really know what's going on. Now, they call bookers writers now. And it's like writing a movie script or a soap opera script or whatever. And that's not what wrestling booking is about. And, I'm really looking forward to, because I will have everybody here in comments, and I will have Pat and Michael give their best and worst of Memphis Bookers as we get into the end of the show, as we show the pictures. But just a brief discussion, and then Pat, things that I might leave out, and Michael, certainly I will. And so I thought I'd give a little summary of what I did when I was booking. Obviously, you managed the crew, you hired, and some times you fired. You had to book all the live events, whether it's a weekly towns, a major towns, or the spot shows. Most bookers attended almost all live events. The booker, obviously, he had already booked that show. He would serve most of the time as the road agent to the live events, figure out and give out instructions and do that sort of thing and be hands-on. Sometimes the booker had to be the security. Sometimes the booker had to be the person that on the fly had to rebook the show, rebook the card, because maybe someone was in trouble. you know, it was certainly a different situation, and you had to figure out, and you had to figure out on the spot. Even though a booker, and I tried to go to almost every town when I was booking the thing. However, a lot of, you know, Jerry Lawler wasn't at every town. Jerry Jarrett wasn't at every town. Maybe the major town, and I thought it was important to be at every town where the talent. Then you could get great ideas from the talent as well. Also, there's bookwork and stuff. The booker normally did the payoffs, figured the payoffs, and then had to send it to the bookkeeper, that sort of thing. The booker normally was in charge of doing the booking sheets. And Paul Neighbors Jr. was talking about booking sheets earlier, and I did different styles than the booking sheets he posted. I used to get more detail and put the talent in every town, and also tried to put the building name and if there's a phone number and maybe directions and that sort of thing to the spread show. So doing booking sheets, you had to lay out TV and you segment the TV. The Memphis show was live on Saturday mornings back in the USWA and CWA time, all 11 to 12:30, and there was an hour and a half show, and you would tape 5 segments for the out of town tape that would show the next week. So what you were going with the main event in Memphis on Monday would not be in Louisville to the following Tuesday, or Nashville the next Saturday, or Evansville the next Wednesday. You had to keep up with that sort of thing. And it was easy compared to Bill Watts. His TV sometime was 8 weeks behind. I don't know how Bill Dundee did it when he booked there, because that was totally different. Laying out TV, hour and a half show, and you had to time it and time it exact and make it entertaining and have stuff exclusively for Memphis, and then exclusive for the or not exclusive for the out of town stuff. The out of town stuff Memphis would always get, but it was interesting to lay out television. You have to oversee production, and I know Jerry Jarrett started going up in the control room at Channel 5, you know, probably in the 90s, and certainly my first booking run in 94 all the way through Power Pro. Unless I had a promo on television, I was upstairs with a headset where I could talk to the announcers, I could talk to the director, I could talk to the camera people, but that was the director's job. I never did. The booker is basically the executive producer of TV as it's on the air. I had a great tag team partner in James Estes, who was the director that did more than director's duty. He was excellent. A big part of the booker's job was a producer or was a problem solver with the talent. If there's issues, discipline issues, whatever issues that the wrestler's mad about the payoff, is the wrestler's mad at another wrestler, maybe like happened one time, Brian Christopher and Jesse James Armstrong, Brian Armstrong, the road dog. I was in my little office at the Mid-South Coliseum in Memphis. I heard all kinds of racket, and they were at each other's throat, just had a match. I watched the match, didn't think anything was wrong with the match. Brian did, cussing Jesse out. Jesse was a Marine, been to Desert Storm, a tough son of a gun. I personally think that fight wouldn't have gone very well for Brian Christopher. However, Brian had a lot of guts and a lot of fight left him. I came out and I yelled at both of them. So I was in the dressing room area. Waller had a private dressing room. I made Brian go in with his dad. Then I had across the hall was my office room, and went in there. And so I talked to Brian. Then I went with Jerry Lawler in the room, and I was saying, we're not going to put up with this bullshit. And talked, and Lawler just let me say the saying. I was a booker, and Lawler was great at letting the booker be the booker. And so then I got them together, and they became great friends. They really did. And so that worked out. And I can tell you, more fights and more action. You're dealing with wrestlers that might be on something, not just beer, not just whiskey. You might be on serious drugs, and you have to nip that in the thing. Booker always has to have a direction. Be prepared. Know where you're going. Know where you're going. That is very important. Back to bookkeeping. I kept up with every house, the attendance, the advance, all that sort of thing. Write it in the booking book so you can look back, say, hey, we're not doing too good tonight. What did we do the first week of September last year? And I can tell, I can grab that last year book I kept in my briefcase. And so that is important. Sometimes a booker has to serve as a boss, a counselor, a friend, uh, and disciplinarian. No doubt about that. It's just a very interesting job, and following up on that quick description to see if you have any follow-up comments, Pat, or follow-up questions. And we have a whole show to deal with this, so we'll go to Pat Trammell now.
Well, it's interesting. I put a lot of thought into this because it's something we don't, as as fans, and I've got nothing but my fan hat here on because I don't know a lot about this, and so I'm a little bit. I'm not going to be embarrassed not to know anything. I just have heard of bookers. I've known bookers. I'm talking to a booker, but and I've been around, spot shows a couple times, and helped with that and all that. Hey, Gail, good to see you. Uh, what when I think about that, and this may be get straight off topic, but I've been thinking about it all afternoon. You know, eh, do you sit down in March and say, okay, I'm probably going to have Lawler through the end of April, so I'm going to book him this way, and then uh, I'm going to go get somebody from Texas and bring him in and put him over, and this is how I'm going to work putting him over because in my mind, when I think of a booker, I remember the first show that I was unlocking the dressing rooms for at Talladega where Ole was there. He walked in and said, God damn it, you're going over tonight, and you're not," and would just walk out. Now that was some podunk spot show, and that's not really booking at all. But do you sit down and say, okay, this is what the next month is going to look like? Or do you think this is what the next 3 months are going to look like? And is that in your head, or do you put it down on paper for yourself?
No, you do a little bit of both. On the main programs, the top matches, I usually had in my mind of where I wanted to go 4 weeks to 6 weeks. The beauty of live television is you do it on Saturday, and then on Monday night, you know real quick if that main event worked or not, if it drew or not. So you can cut it off. You have to be flexible. And somebody asked about pacing, and it's just kind of whether it's a show based on heat or a show based on babyface revenge or a show on memories. It's just depending on what it just depends on what direction you're going. So I tried to think in advance, but you always had to be flexible for no shows or whatever. You had to be always prepared to change, whether it was because of a bad house or a wrestler that just left in the middle of the night, and that's happened. So did that answer that question?
Yes, it did. I mean, it's the more I think about it, the more kind of I want to learn about it because I don't, I just not something I've just never been around that much.
And
I mean, I've heard you talk about it. I've heard Jerry talk about it. We've talked about it on here, but I mean, for example, I've heard the kind of the halfway humorous tale that when the house was down, everybody'd say, "Well, let's go get Austin Idol and get the house up, and then he'll leave, and then we'll start all over again." But do you plan it out? Do you plan it out like that? And do you wake up one day and say, you know what? And this is hypothetical, okay? You wake up Tuesday morning in Memphis, and you've been drawing 8,500, and this night, the third Lawler Dundee, and this is all facetious, okay? The third Lawler Dundee top of the card in the last 2 months, and you drew 6,500, and you think, I got to get this up, and you think, let's call Idle, wonder what Tommy Rich is doing, think he'd like a break from Georgia. Where's Dutch now? Are those the kind of things that go through your head?
Not after one bad house. No.
Okay.
What would you think right then is, well, okay, if I'm going to, you probably already knew what you were going to do in the match. Say you were going to return it. If it didn't draw, you would change the finish and put the babyface over and go a different direction. And usually with the Idol coming in, that was more, you had heat on the heels, you had Lawler where he needed help. And it's the Jackie Fargo effect that was done way before Austin Idol and way before Jimmy Valiant and so many other different guys. It started with Fargo. Fargo was the one Lawler would call. And Fargo, who would he call, Michael? He would call somebody.
Oh, absolutely. He'd call Tojo.
Or Roughhouse, who I was thinking.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, if Fargo's coming in and you want a big pop and something different, you get Roughhouse. Roughhouse was when Roughhouse would come to town, he was an attraction. He wasn't somebody you were going to bring in for a program later in his career.
Right.
Early in his career, when it was Jackie and Sonny Fargo, they were parts of programs. But later in his career, he became a referee and then became Roughhouse. Then he was an attraction. And there's a difference between an attraction and somebody you're giving a push to.
They did that with Andre too.
Yeah, Andre's an excellent example. Excellent example. Randy, one of the things too, if I may interject, and I never booked, obviously, but I was around bookers, many different bookers. One of the best I'm sitting in the same room with right now, or in the same TV screen with right now, and Randy Hales. But I think a booker is the strength of a booker, in my opinion, is somebody that is quick on their feet, like you said, can make a quick turn if something goes wrong or something goes haywire, or somebody leaves town or somebody gets hurt or whatever the case may be, quick on their feet, but also as somebody that is I can compare it to radio, a program director, because you're taking the program, whether it's the main event, the opening match, whatever, not as much the opening match, but the main event or the different stars or so forth, and bringing it through a period of time, hopefully to draw money, to draw big houses, so forth and so on back in those days. I think the deal with a booker this day and time, and they have writers instead of bookers, I think the whole premise has changed. I don't think
the worst.
I don't disagree with that. Let me ask
you a question as a radio programmer. Now, name three of the biggest disc jockeys that had the most success with you. Name three and name the market they were in. Just name three people. Then I have a question on how you managed them.
Coyote McLeod, without a doubt, in Nashville. Without a doubt, he was the Prince of Nashville. Glenn Beck in Phoenix, young, but full of piss and vinegar, and a brilliant artist. And Steve in DC, who was a morning show I had in St. Louis right before I bought this station. And they all had to be handled differently. They all had to be promoted differently to get them over to the people that they were talking to. And some were more viable for a TV shot, or there's some that you didn't really want to put on TV for certain or sundry reasons. And you always had to handle all of them differently. But it's the same way in the wrestling ring. Jerry Lawler was handled, take Jerry Jarrett as a booker and as the promoter. Jerry Lawler was handled differently than Jackie Fargo. Jackie Fargo was handled differently than Tojo Yamamoto. I mean, right on down the line, later on, when Jerry bought Dallas, Steve Austin in his early career was handled a lot different than working with Eric Embry, for instance. And I think you have to measure the talent. You have to know what you've got and how far, what's their ceiling? How far can you take them before you can't take them anymore? Just can't take them any higher in their career.
Now, the question I have for you with these great disc jockeys, did you let them go out there, have them go out there and meet themselves like we did? We'd give bullet points, say, you need to plug this, your match is this or that or not. You didn't write out scripts. And a lot of folks, and they do that apparently in the WWE and modern wrestling, and that's why it seems so scripted, because it is scripted. Managing star disc jockeys or even the opening match disc jockey, you didn't write out, maybe write out a commercial for them, that's different. But as far as when they're in their entertaining role, plugging a song or intro on a song or talking about an artist, I would imagine it was their words and you did not script them, correct?
My deal was this. Rule number one, be entertaining. Always rule number one. Rule number two, don't lose the license. Don't say something that's going to get us thrown off the air. Don't go saying something or doing something crazy that's going to get craziness started. And number three, make sure you mention the call letters. That was it. Let them go. I mean, if you hire the right, it's just like wrestlers. If you bring the right wrestler in, you don't have to babysit him or babysit her. You just turn them loose, let them do their thing. That was the same way with, Coyote McLeod he'd get off the air at 9:00. At 10:30, he was at Old Charlie's drunk. Okay. And he went on there. I can't tell you how many times he went on the air at Kicks 104 at 5:30 in the morning. And he's just gotten home from a bar or just gotten to the station from a bar or a club at 5:30. I mean, that was the way he was. Glenn Beck was very cerebral. Glenn would have a million ideas. He would come in my office 4 times after he'd get off the air. And sometimes when he's still on the air and say, I got this idea. And his ideas were, some of them were really good and some of them were really bad. So you had to shoot down balloons, and whatever the golden balloon is or the golden egg was, you kept. And that was him. Steve and DC were just off the rails, but that was their show. That's what they were about. When they brought me in when they brought him back from being, they were excommunicated from radio. That's the only word I can use. They wanted to bring him back. They wanted somebody that had knowledge of him that could control them. Well, I wasn't there to control them. What they did on the air, they did on the air. I was there to help make sure they reined in, that they didn't get off the rails. And they were as successful at a lower powered radio station in St. Louis when they came back as they were before. But we were able to prop them up and keep them, and they did the creative and they did their show. And, I might sit in on their morning show meeting once a month just to say, hey, you guys are doing great, or, we're going to do this promotion. You guys have got an idea to lead into this promotion we got for the rest of the station, that kind of thing. But as far as micromanaging and things like that, here's the deal. It's easier to rein somebody in than to push somebody out. And that was the way I dealt with talent. Now, other talent on the station, they had to read the cards. They had a format. They had 10 seconds to talk. And I rode their butts. But again, that's how you build the program, if you would, which is what a program director does. And I think the same way with a booker. I don't think you're going to treat Brian Lawler or Brian Christopher the same way you're going to treat Jerry Lawler. I mean, that to me, you've got 2 different individuals. Yeah, they have a lot of similarities, but you're not going to program Jerry the way you program Brian. And I think the deal with Jerry is, I think, Jerry's a mastermind. I mean, to me, Jerry Lawler is a wrestling genius, but he was also not that great of a booker. Okay. So that's my opinion. He had great ideas, and some of them were really different, and some of them sold and some of them didn't. And as we get and talk about individual bookers, I think the most successful bookers are the ones that never were the heavyweight champion of the world or never were in the the big seat.
Very interesting, and we'll get right now to the different things, and some of these we will spend a lot of time with. Others, we will just talk about them. We're going to start with the guy that I think, booking wise, as far as most people remember, of the first major draw in Memphis. The person booking at the time, this is graphic at the top, 5776. 5776, Adam, if you could go ahead. And most people, including myself, wasn't watching wrestling in the 50s. This is Roy Welch's son. This is Edward Welch, known to all wrestling fans as Buddy Fuller. Buddy Fuller took a town that was basically running 40 type of wrestling into the mid to late 50s, and the town exploded with two guys, Spudney Monroe and Billy Wicks. That program, booked by Buddy Fuller and with special referee Rocky Marciano, great famed boxer, put to this day, I believe, and in modern wrestling, maybe it's but at Rosswood Park, baseball park, that's no longer there in Memphis, Tennessee, did 16 to 18,000 people for the blow off of Billy Wicks and Spudney Monroe. So, Pat, I think we have to start with Buddy Fuller.
Well, I think in Memphis, and I have not, and I wish I had gone back and read some Cornette because he loves the history stuff. But yeah, I understand that there's never been anything bigger than that. And I think a lot of us have listened to the to Tony Richards series on the Fuller and the Welch family, and they were born booking. They were all born booking. But yeah, and Greg, that's Russwood Park. Where was that, Randy? Do you know?
Michael might answer that because it was gone by the time I was around. It was close to downtown Memphis, if not in downtown Memphis.
Yeah, I want to say it was in the Midtown area. I want to say out by Central. I want to say it's out in that Midtown area, if I recall correctly. I wasn't in Memphis at that time either. I got to Memphis when the Memphis Chicks were playing in the stadium next to the Mid-South Coliseum in '77. But the park, I want to say the park was in that Central Avenue, Midtown area of Memphis.
And Greg says it was downtown.
But you brought
downtown Memphis.
All right, I'm looking it up on Google. Let's see.
Okay.
Buddy Fuller.
Yeah, throw that Google
built
map
in 1896. City directories gave its address as 914 Madison Avenue. Its boundary streets were Madison South, Home Plate, Dunlap Street, and Jefferson Avenue.
That's downtown Memphis.
Yeah, that's pretty close. That's flat downtown right there.
Because Madison runs on into Midtown.
It does. Yeah.
Parallel to
Buddy Fuller passed away in 1996, I believe. He was in his mid-70s. So Buddy Fuller, obviously, I didn't know much about his booking, but I've seen a lot of video of his sons, and we will talk about that in a little bit, Ron and Robert. The next picture we want to look at, the very next picture, Adam, is 5777. And the reason I wanted to do this is that after Buddy Fuller left Memphis, I don't know if he was fired, whatever the case, his dad, Roy Welch, shown here with Buddy, his son Buddy, and with promoter Nick Gulas. After Buddy, Roy Welch was the booker. Now, with this picture up there again, Roy followed his son Buddy, and he was followed by, and we'll get to that in a minute, with Jerry Jarrett, the first time in the mid to late 60s, who really took Memphis wrestling in a newer and and just an unbelievable era where we still talk about it on this show every Tuesday night. Now, Michael, how much, because you would know, I've talked on the phone with Nick a time or two back in the day, how much was, and I guess before I ask you how much involved Nick was involved in the actual booking, I don't know much about his whether he booked or supervised or whatever. The last wrestler picture that we have in the very last one, toward the bottom, next to last row, is 5804, because we certainly know that Lynn Rossi did a lot of the booking, maybe before the split, but certainly after the split, even after Lynn Rossi's car wreck. So, Michael, now I throw it to you. Talk about involvement of Lynn Rossi as a booker, and talk about how much Nick, and he was a hands-on guy, so I'm sure he gave his opinion, but I have no idea if Nick would do like Jerry did, Jerry Lawler did, I did, and Jim Cornette did, and every booker I've ever known, flat out give the finishes. I don't know if he's that hands-on. And Michael will tell you about Nick Gulas right now as we go back to that Nick Gulas, Roy Welch, Buddy Fuller picture, please, Adam. Michael?
Well, a lot of my knowledge, because I was never in the booking office, but a lot of my knowledge comes on what George has explained. But in the period I know in the 70s, and I would say they sort of let Jerry, Memphis was doing well, and as long as Memphis was doing well, nobody screwed with him.
Oh.
I mean, there was some, consternation over the fact that George wanted to book. George wanted to go where the rings, where the best crowds were, and he wanted to go where the hottest women were, and that was Memphis. Okay, so that was part of that. But the booking, to quote George, the booking meetings would be on a Tuesday in Nashville on 8th Avenue, when the office was on 8th Avenue, and it would be Nick, himself, Eddie Marlin, Lynn Rossi, and Mike Duncan. And they would be, and George and Mike Duncan would be more of the keep up with who's where, so we won't double book, or we didn't leave somebody out or something like that. But they laid out the TVs, they laid out the shows at the arenas, and you got to realize they're running weekly towns in Chattanooga, Memphis, Birmingham, Huntsville,
Louisville.
Louisville. At that point, Louisville and Evansville was on board. So that's a game in itself. And then you got to do TVs, and you had 4 live TV shows every Saturday, plus some other live shows during the week or on Sunday. That's a big job. And I think George said that at the peak of the number of talent that they had in the territory at one time, I think George said between 45 and 49 wrestlers would be used by the office in a given week, being that the spread was what it was. Now, a lot of them were, ham and egg talent and underneath card talent, obviously. But, they had to put bodies in places, and they had a lot of places to put them every week.
Do you remember, certainly Greg mentions the Sam Davis Hotel, one of the sites for the Nick Gulas wrestling thing. And I wanted to also say this, Roy Welch died shortly after the split with Jarrett. He died in 1977 at 75 years old. What wrestling office? I know later on there was one on 8th Avenue. What wrestling offices?
I started when I worked with Nick. They had just moved into they just moved into the 8th Avenue office the year before. I never met Roy Welch personally. He was in a rest home, in a nursing home, and had dementia when I first started. Yes, sir. And when I started first working for Nick, And I think Nick would go over to Dyersburg and see him once or twice a month, just, not to really get get any information, because he wasn't capable of doing that at that time in his life. But I remember Nick's office at the Sam Davis Hotel in Nashville when I was at Vanderbilt. And the Sam Davis was on the western brow of downtown, sort of over where the National Life and Accident Insurance Company, at that time, the big skyscraper, 36 stories high in Tennessee, was just west of the Capitol building. And the Sam Davis was down on Commerce, between Commerce and, I want to say it was on 7th Avenue, maybe, or 9th, but I think it was 7th Avenue. And it was at that time, it was a flop house. It was not a hotel you were going to go to Nashville and stay in. Before that, he was at the Knoll Hotel, which was on the corner of 4th Street and Church, that burned on. Ironically, his first two offices, the Maxwell House Hotel, which is the Third National Bank building on 4th, and it's the northwest corner of 4th Street and or 4th Avenue and Church Street. And then he moved catacornered after the Maxwell House burned to the Knoll Hotel, and he had an office in the lobby of the Knoll Hotel. And that was at in the southeast corner of 4th and Church.
I have a question for you old fellas. I hear about businesses operating out of hotels, out of a hotel room, or were there office suites, or
it was an office. It was an office, both of them. You know how hotels in the old style, you go to some place like Louisville and you go to the Seelbach or you go over to the Brown, they have little stores in the like a little drugstore. That's what it was. It was a little office in the lobby. One of the reasons, because a lot of the talent didn't rent apartments or any of that stuff. So they'd get a weekly rate at the Sam Davis Hotel, or a weekly rate at the Knoll Hotel, or especially people that would come in. I remember the story about Bob Ramstead and Bill Costello coming in from Canada, and they were a tag team, and they literally lived in the Knoll Hotel or the Sam Davis Hotel the whole time they were there. And of course, Bill Costello was shot in a bar fight in Nashville back in the 60s. But a lot of the talent would stay in the hotel, and the promoters were renting their space from the hotel. So the management of the hotel would make a good sweetheart offer to weekly rentals or monthly rentals for the boys.
That used to be a thing. I think Joe DiMaggio lived in a hotel in New York his whole career.
Yeah, I've heard that too. And Mike, you're so familiar with St. Louis wrestling. Why, if you can, explain that Sam Munchnick's office was always in a hotel in St. Louis, correct?
Yeah. Right. And of course, he ran his show in the ballroom at the Chase. And the Chase Hotel in Memphis, or in St. Louis, was on the east side of the park, where the 1904 World's Fair was. It was on the east side of the park, right there off Grand Avenue, and next to the Basilica. And it was a gorgeous hotel. I mean, I've seen pictures of it, and then it went down, and as all downtown hotels did, and then it got restored. And when I programmed in St. Louis in the mid-90s, the Chase was back to being the Royal Hotel of St. Louis at the time. And then the wrestling was in the ballroom at the Chase. And what was amazing about the ballroom of the Chase is it only had like a 14-foot ceiling. I mean, it wasn't a huge ballroom. It was a lower ceiling ballroom, and that's where they shot TV.
One thing that's interesting.
And people would come and sit at tables and dress up like they were going to dinner.
Michael was talking about Nick Dulas's office. Jerry Jarrett, when he made the split in 1977, a couple of different times for a small amount of time, and then certainly when he and Jeff opened up TNA, had an office in Hendersonville. But for the most part, Jerry Jarrett, whether it was at the Landings or whether it was on Cumberland Hill Drive or wherever he was, he had a home office. Jerry Lawler never had an office in Memphis. Short period of time, I rented an office in Memphis at Corey Macklin's advertising agency, and I'll have a big office. But heck, I figured out that's the worst place in the world, a wrestling office, the worst place in the world to get work done. I need to be at home. Nobody's bothering me. And so I certainly had more success with that as well. But it's interesting that Jerry Jarrett had that home office and that Henderson at 467 Cumberland Hills Drive. Man, if I ever won the $1 billion lottery, I would buy that house on Cumberland Hills Drive and try to furnish it like he furnished it, and do Talking Memphis Wrestling every week from there. Now,
I want to add an interesting sideline. This is more of a personal thing. When I started out in radio, I was hired when I was 15 years old by a guy named M.D. Smith III, who owned Channel 31 and owned Way Radio in Huntsville. And I've told the story before, how they came through my grocery line while I was checking out at Bruno's, and we got to talk, and he gave me a job in radio. In the summer that first year, his office was in the back of his house, a la Jerry Jarrett. He had a big swimming pool, and his office was on the backside of the swimming pool. He was close enough he could walk into his house, get him something to eat or get him something to drink or whatever the case may be, but he was away from the house where he could get work done. And if you remember Jerry Jarrett's office, even though it was connected by hallway to his main house, it was sort of a secluded office in the back because you had to go around back and park to get to the office. You went in the back door.
Absolutely. You could go in the office through the ballroom, and there was a door there, but also at the back of the thing, there was another door that if you had the boys coming or a meeting or whatever the case, and it was just an interesting situation. One of the things I'm going to try, I can tell you right now, because it is 8:11, we're not going to get through everything. I want to get through as much as we can the Memphis Bookers. We won't get through the national thing, so this will be a two-parter, and we're just going to take the time to tell our story. If we don't get through Memphis, we don't get through Memphis, and we'll go with our next slide. And this, I think, is I'm going to ask the question who later on in the show when we get finished with the Memphis Bookers, who was the best and who was the worst in our opinions. And I can guarantee you that I think everybody watching, every member of the panel, everybody with any sense known to man, because there's no doubt about it, starting booking in the late 60s, absolutely without a doubt, the most successful booker in the history of Memphis TV. Not only reinvented wrestling in Memphis, but reinvented booking, period, as people from all over the world would steal Jerry Jarrett's ideas. Number 5778, the next slide. 5778, Jerry Jarrett, born on September the 4th, 1942, passed away not that long ago, February 14th, Valentine's Day in 2023 at 80 years old. He, as he has told me, and as he said on podcast, he booked before he was a booker. He used to, one of his jobs, he was refereeing, and he was being trained to wrestle and that sort of thing. And he would ride and drive Roy Welch to the matches. Roy Welch, that's why we started with him and showed that picture 5777 of Roy Welch, because his job was, and Jerry Jarrett didn't know what was happening, mentoring and talking about booking and explaining stuff to Jerry Jarrett. As we talk about Jerry Jarrett, Roy Welch finally in the conversation started asking, certainly said, what did you think about this? What did you think about this? And Jerry said, well, I didn't like that match. Why didn't you like this match, Jerry? He said, that looked fake. He said that to Roy Welch. Jerry wasn't smart yet. That looked fake. That didn't look real. Said that looked like a rehearsed dance, and said that was horrible. And so finally, he started talking every week there, every week back, and he said, well, book me a card, write a TV. So Jarrett did it and give it to Roy, and Roy would carry it out. The boys thought it was coming to to the boys thought it was coming from Roy Welch, but in reality, it was coming from Jerry Jarrett. Well, finally, Roy said, "Hey, you're ready. You've been booking this thing anyway. We're doing record business. You're the booker." He had a crew, and I've heard the names and names. Les Thatcher denies it, and Jerry Jarrett's told this story, but Les Thatcher was one of the ones, and Dennis Hall was another, and Lynn Rossi might have been the other when that was announced by Roy. That Jerry Jarrett was the Bookers said that he's not even a wrestler, that young punky, blah 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 blah. And Roy said, "You dumb son of a bitches. He's been booked for every week for a year, and I've been the messenger. He's already been the booker. The money you made been making the last year is because of Jerry Jarrett." So I'm sure you've heard that story, Michael. I'll let you come next with that, but Pat is certainly a historian on Jerry Jarrett, and I see that in a good way. I've he researched the good, and I've supplied him with some of the bad, as we all have. I can tell you, Lawler's bad, my bad, Dundee's bad. Certainly, with everybody that we talk about, obviously with Jerry Jarrett, who is my choice for the best booker, not only in Memphis. I think Jerry Jarrett is the best booker from the 60s all the way. I think the business has changed. He was older, and I would say uh, that his last full great year was probably 86. In the early 90s with the Moondogs and Lawler and Jeff Jarrett program, the Moondog Larry and Jeff Jarrett kind of had a big part of booking that. But Jerry Jarrett was a genius booking. He had success in Atlanta, then decided he was ignoring the home territory and had to get home. That was in about 72, 73 that he went with Atlanta. Jerry Jarrett, without a doubt. When I asked Randy West, the best and the worst, first thing he said was absolutely Jerry Jarrett. And he said that he saw so many bookers come in, and then after a couple of months, it goes down. And whether, no matter who the booker was, and we'll talk about some of the names, if it went bad quick, Jerry Jarrett was back in control. The so and so might be called the booker, but it was Jerry Jarrett booking. It was his handwriting on the book. It was his handwriting on the TV format. Jerry Jarrett is a genius. Absolutely. He's a genius booker, a genius promoter, a genius businessman. Now, Pat, before we go to Michael, we'll let you talk on this subject.
Well, I talked to Jerry about that a lot. At some point, and he actually kind of told the story that he was, as you told it, that he really didn't realize what he was getting into. He was riding over with with Mr. Welch, and he said he would ask him about stuff, and he said they would just talk. And he said, at that point in time, those were almost, in those days, those were almost 4 hour rides. And he said he would start asking him, and he said, before he said, about 6 or 8 months in, he started thinking about it because he knew he was going to be asked about it. But, I asked him, I said, well, where did you get the ideas? And he said one thing that I think helped me a lot is that and I mean, you've been in his house. The guy had more books than I do. He said, I read all my life. And he said a lot of that stuff is Cain and Abel from the Bible, and a lot of that stuff is, just history and stuff like that. So I think he was prepared for it before he started doing it. And again, Randy, I feel a little bit inadequate to talk about it because it's still, as much as I've, love wrestling, been hung around it as much as I could, as much as you and Michael, and, and other people have been great to me to kind of let me hang around. I don't know a lot about the inner workings of it, which is why I'm kind of fascinated to be here. But Jerry just talked about it like it would just come to him like that.
Yeah, he was absolutely brilliant. There's no doubt, and I'm sure you'll have more questions for sure, Pat. And I encourage that. And our numbers are good and very good, and people seem to enjoy this. And certainly, we could do 20 shows on Jerry Jarrett's booking. And hello to everybody that's watching, including my buddy Barry. Hey, Barry, I hope you're doing well. The genius of Jerry Jarrett, and I thought that summed it up just perfectly. And certainly you experienced it not just as a viewer, but as somebody that worked for him as announcer, and you were around him at his house and in the office and that sort of thing. So the brilliance of Jerry Jarrett, explain.
Well, first of all, I think Pat hit the nail on the head. Very well read, extremely well read. And not just reading about sports or pop culture or anything, the classics. And I saw the books in his bookcase, and they weren't just sitting there with their gathering dust. They had pages that had been torn and pages that had been used. And hey, that's number one. And anybody with any modicum of intelligence that also is a free thinker, as had a creative mind, which I think that's the one thing that Jerry Jarrett gets not credited as much for, is the creative mind. Because the creative, you take the genius, the well-read, the genius part, you add a creative mind, and then you add what your knowledge is of not only the subject matter, but what the knowledge is of the audience. What is the audience going to buy into? What's going to what's going to make them spend $5, $10, $20 to come on a Monday night or a Wednesday night or a Saturday night in Chattanooga to come to a live wrestling match? And we had the thing last week with Jimmy Cornette about, what is wrestling? The big guy, the little guy with the fight on the side of the road, you stop to watch it. Boy, you'd pay $10 to see him fight. That's wrestling. And I think Jerry Jarrett was the perfect master of each of those three things: intelligence, creativity, and knowing his audience. And I think you take that in any sport, you take that in any business, you take that in any form of entertainment. You put those three things together, and if you can hit home runs in each of those areas, you're going to be successful. It's not as it was once quoted to me, it ain't brain salad surgery. So, and I think that was an Emerson, Lake and Palmer album.
My brother had that album.
Yeah, we played it at ERC-FM, Rock in Stereo, WERC-FM, Birmingham. But anyway, I think when you take that all into consideration, Jerry Jarrett was the master. And when we talk about some of the other bookers and some of the other promotions in the other territories, I think we're going to find similar individuals that have those three qualities. But I think Jerry Jarrett had another quality that, again, gets undersold. I think he was willing, just like he learned at the master's knee. I mean, thank God I learned at the master's knee. I had Scott Shannon and Johnny Randolph to mentor me, and my success is a combination of their knowledge and what I took of them to put into my own radio stations, if you would. I think the one thing that Jerry doesn't get talked enough about was him allowing young people the opportunity to book, make mistakes. You're going to make mistakes. Hell, I make mistakes. I made a big one yesterday, but I got it out of the way for the week. I don't have to worry about it anymore. But no, I mean, you take young people, young talent, people you recognize that have those three qualities: a Randy Hales, a Dutch Mantel, a Jerry Jarrett, or Jerry Lawler. Those you put those people in a position where they can learn. If they work hard and do what they know how to do, things are going to go up. You're going to make money and not have to work as hard. Perfect scenario.
Now,
but the other case, you make a decision, maybe you get pressured that, well, this guy did well over there, so let's bring him over. Perfect example. Robert Fuller did fabulous work in Knoxville. He comes to Memphis and the place tanks.
Let's go ahead and tell that story right now and go ahead and play 50 or show Adam 5781. And I will set up that Jerry Jarrett started his company in 1977. And then shortly, a couple of months after, something like that, he brought in Buddy Fuller. And Tony Richards might have said this, or somebody somebody else had mentioned this, but the Roy Welch had so many connections, and Buddy Fuller also with sponsors, with the American Legion, with different things. And so Buddy Fuller was brought in, not a half partner, and I don't know the percentage. And Michael, if you do, I wish you would say, but Buddy Fuller became a partner in the company. Well, 2 years in, Buddy Fuller went to Jerry Jarrett and said, Jerry, that things are still good. It tailed off a little bit. You've been booking this thing since before the company started, since the 60s. And said, my son Robert is on fire as a booker in Knoxville. He is on fire. And that's not BS. That's not bullshit. He had it on fire in Knoxville. He came in to Memphis, and I remember the television. It was just so much of a change. The first thing is that he tried to build stars. He tried to build himself. He tried to bring the Mongolian Stomper back, who drew a ton of money here in '75. Had Jimmy Golden, had great talent, and the great talent. He did some of the same angles he did in Knoxville. It just didn't get over. You have to know the territory. You have to know the territory. And as we talk about myself, as a fan, I'd watched it since I was 10 years old. I knew what I liked. I knew what the fans liked. I knew big crowds, what didn't. So I had a clue. Now, Robert Fuller, who had wrestled in, never did a lot of TVs. They brought him in, and it lasted about 4 or 5 months to finally he had to go. And Buddy is the one said it was my son, it was my idea. I'll tell him, because Jerry just said I'll tell him, and Jerry ended up following Robert. But Robert, and I don't want to come across I'm knocking Robert Fuller, and we'll talk about other people in just a minute, had great success in other places, but wasn't for me. Or every territory was different. I couldn't have gone to, let's say, Texas, and didn't have a lot of history of Texas. I couldn't have done there. I wouldn't have known the history to do a Friday night memory like I did Monday night memory, and near sellout of the Mid-South Coliseum. I wouldn't have known. Robert just didn't click, and that upsets me, because I watch Knoxville stuff, and I watch also Dothan stuff, Birmingham stuff on the other end. Robert Fuller was a good booker. He was not in Memphis. Make sense?
It makes perfect sense. And while you're talking about that, I'm sitting there thinking, and I don't know exactly if I can express this to where it might make some sense or not. And part of this is not wrestling related.
That's okay. That's good.
I think everybody knows generally that what my career has been running around the Southeast in larger to mid-sized towns, and I've spent a lot of time in East Tennessee. I spent a lot of time in Nashville. I've spent a lot of time in Memphis. We've had our former company had a office in Memphis for 20 years, and we still the bank that I'm a part of now I still have one of Randy's classmates that works for me in Memphis, and so I spent a lot of time in Memphis. I spent a lot of time in Atlanta. I spent a lot of time in Tampa. I spent a lot of time in the Carolinas. And I again, I'm not sure how to express. Memphis is a different town. And the wrestling fans are culturally different than anywhere else. And I think that's why it's the greatest wrestling town in America. And it also has there are probably people on the chat tonight that have been to wrestling shows at the Mid-South Coliseum 40 years ago and 30 years ago. And, I'm not saying that there's a snobbery about it, but, they wanted their Memphis wrestling. They didn't want, what Robert had. And, Robert and Ron have been fantastic bookers for 50 years. But this place is just different. And you can't just change out the talent, because the thing that I've noticed about Memphis, and basically I grew up on Georgia Championship Wrestling. With the exception of Dusty and Tommy Rich for a short period of time, nobody has the loyalty of the Memphis wrestling fans like the Memphis wrestling babyfaces. Like Lawler and Dundee and all the rest of them. So when they're over, they're going to be over, and you can't replace Lawler with Archie Goldie for 6 months. It's just not going to work. That Memphis wrestling fans, I believe, and there's a lot of Memphis wrestling fans on here, and if I misspeak, I apologize. Memphis wrestling fans are living their life through Memphis wrestling. This is not something they do on Monday night for entertainment. They're a part of this. They're a part of this story, and it's difficult for me to express how different that is in any other city that I've been around wrestling in. And Michael, you've been around more wrestling towns than I have, and you can probably speak to that too.
Before we have Michael speak to that, let me just say this, and you brought it up where Mongolia and Stomper's not going to replace Jerry Lawler, and he didn't. Absolutely, neither would Robert Fuller, or neither would Jimmy Golden, or neither would anybody else, and you wasn't going to replace Bill Dundee either. And what Robert was smart enough to do is he could tell that he wanted to get over, and it wasn't happening, and so he put himself in the tag team with Bill Dundee, and because Bill Dundee was Bill Dundee, they got over. But Robert never, like, maybe it's just a rivalry, whatever the case, who knows? Some people like, I know you have trouble believing this. Not everybody likes me, Pat. Just like not everybody liked Jerry Lawler, and I love Jerry Lawler. However, Robert Fuller didn't, and Lawler probably didn't really like Robert Fuller. And if you can't get along with your top star, especially when you start moving him down the card, not having him be the center of the TV that he's been for 5 years, that wasn't going to work. So, Michael, I think that was the biggest reason Robert Fuller wasn't successful, is the lack of how he booked Lawler, even though Lawler, because Jerry Jarrett was still the promoter and the major stockholder of the company, he still had some say-so. So Robert Fuller knew he couldn't fire Jerry Lawler, and it would have been insane if he would. But that was the reason that Robert wasn't successful, I think. Now, you follow up on Robert Fuller.
Well, first of all, before I want to answer a question going back 5 or 6 minutes ago about Buddy Fuller, his dad's involvement and his role in Jerry Jarrett buying the territory, or getting Nick's territory. Nick Goulas, and I was working for Nick when all this happened, or actually I wasn't. I was in Memphis, but I was very aware of what was going on because I was doing some stuff with Jerry Lawler. Anyway, Buddy Fuller in '79, when I was doing the play-by-play for Nick swore, and I heard him say it, that he would never sell his territory, never sell it to that so-and-so Jerry Jarrett. That Jerry Jarrett stole from him, and I mean, he would go around about it. Buddy Fuller came in, and Nick sold the territory to Buddy because Buddy was the partner of Jerry. Minority partner, but the deal came through Buddy Fuller. That was what I was, and that was a Cecil Brandstetter deal with the lawyer, with all of that, because Cecil at one time represented Nick and then represented Jerry. So and he was a great attorney, by the way, great family in Nashville. But that was part of Buddy's scenario there. The Robert Fuller thing in Memphis, I think, is a perfect storm of how to step into a situation at the wrong time. Timing is so important in my career. I stepped into Memphis, Tennessee at WMPS the day 2 weeks after they fired Rick Dees. I was 23 years old. Was I ready for it? Hell no. And I was lucky to come out, and the station plummeted to a 3 share. I brought it back to a 5.5, and then they flipped it country, and I went to Hartford, by God, Connecticut. But it was one of those things that I learned in looking at positions in programming and management and radio, that timing is as big a thing as anything. How many high school coaches do you see retire after a successful run and then the team tank for the next 5 years?
Over and over and over and over. As a matter of fact, in Jonesboro, Arkansas, we've in the area, right in Jonesboro, we have 5 different school systems. And in Paragould, 20 miles away, and there's so many little towns. I bet 80% of those schools have had changes this year in their football program, and it's hard to get to, every coach is different, just like every booker is different.
Right. Well, and that's part of what I'm getting to with the Booker situation is, you had a hot run in Memphis, and Jerry did a great job, and then all of a sudden here comes Robert with some new ideas, because, everybody burns out at what they do. At some point in time, I call it recharging the batteries. I have to do it. You have to do it. I know, Pat, you and I have talked about this. There are times you just have to step back and recharge the batteries, whether it's going to the beach, whether it's just going up to the state park for a day and spending a day walking in the woods and taking deep breaths, whether it's going into a church and saying and sitting in a pew for 2 hours without anybody else there to reflect. You got to recharge the batteries. And I think that was sort of the thing that Jerry he wasn't getting stale, but it was a time that he'd been doing. He needed to step back and let somebody else do, and then recharge his batteries. Unfortunately for Robert came in, changed everything, and not having a great relationship with your number one talent in Jerry Lawler, then you have, that creates a situation that you explained. So I think there was sort of a perfect storm for failure there, or there was a good opportunity not to be successful. And I think that. And I think that the great quote I've heard, and I heard Jerry Jarrett tell the story, that they're looking at the house at the Mid-South Coliseum, and Jerry Jarrett turns to Robert Fuller and says, "Well, it can't get much worse." And Robert Fuller says, "Oh, yes, it can."
Yeah,
and then he was gone. And so he was gone. So I think that played into it. I think the other part of that, with Jerry bringing in other bookers and then giving young people a try, he had good bookers that he brought. I thought Judge Mantell was a good booker because, again, Dutch is well read, he's smart, he has a creative mind, and he can read the room. I mean, that's a success formula. Tom Ernesto wasn't. Tom Ernesto had a formula that worked in Atlanta and worked when he was in one of the half of the Assassins. And he used that formula, whoever he worked for. It worked for Nick. I came in as Nick was getting ready to blow Tom out, and they did the angle where they put Tom in the ring. He got pulled in the ring. I took the microphone, and from then on, I was the announcer, and Tom finished, 2 months later, Tom was gone, and Tom Ernesto with him, and it was the territory was again reading the room. I got to tell you that there's been some other situations in Memphis where situations may have been, Lawler breaking his leg, and then everybody, to be honest with you, Lawler breaking his leg and being out for a little over a year was a blessing in disguise, because it proved that you could still book and win in Memphis without the superstar, without
the king,
without the king. And I think that was a great lesson to be learned. But again, going back to what Pat said, Memphis is a different world. And having programmed radio there, I have always said, and you guys may not agree with me, Memphis is the largest city in Mississippi. It's not a Tennessee city. It's not an Arkansas city. It thinks, works, plays, the attitude, the surroundings. It's Mississippi. It's the biggest city in Mississippi. And there's a lot of similarity. There's more similarity to Memphis and New Orleans, or Memphis and St. Louis, than there is to Memphis and Nashville. Those are two different worlds.
That's absolutely right.
Absolutely. So
Absolutely
the
right.
Robert Fuller experiment didn't work. Jerry Jarrett, because they were having a promotion war in Knoxville, and Robert took the whole crew. Jerry Jarrett then came up with the concession stand brawl and Tupelo, and one of the most memorable events ever in Memphis.
Randy, can I ask you something about that period?
Yes.
And I don't know, where you were at the time or anything, or if what you heard after the fact from Jerry or whatever. But I know that at some point, basically Lawler was booking as much as Jerry, and Jerry'd take a vacation, and Lawler'd book it and all that. Was Lawler content just to be wrestling in the early years, or once he got to the top of the card, did he have or want input into the booking?
Oh, from as far as booking himself, I would say from maybe from the time he got hot in '74, and Nick was still around, but he had input, and then he had input in his own stuff. And obviously, I mean, wrestlers, he's thinking, man, I would do this different, do this different. And I'm sure he thought, just like Buddy Fuller did, said, I need to help Jerry here, because it's a burnout type of job. I did it for USWA for almost 3 years straight, and then 3 months, maybe 4 or 5 off, and then I did it for 3 years for Power Pro. That's 6 years, and that's why I had Brandon Baxter helping me, and because I knew, it's just so stressful, and you tend to repeat stuff, and you need different visions. And what I want to go to next is, you kind of alluded to it, how Jerry Jarrett mentored so many different people, including me, and certainly Jeff Jarrett and others. But certainly after the Robert Fuller thing happened, Bill Dundee went to Jerry Jarrett and said, boss, I think I'm good at finishes. I'm good at this. And said, I think I want to be a booker. And Jerry said, well, do you have a book? He said, who? A book? What kind of book? He said, a booking book. And so he had to explain, like a day planner type of thing. Say, be at my house on the landings at 10 o'clock or 9 o'clock, whatever, on Tuesday morning. And he said, Bill Dundee said, he never really knew what it took to be a booker, to he was there every day, and he learned from Jerry Jarrett. We want to play 5780 right now, and it's a superstar, Bill Dundee, who started as the assistant booker and then finally was named the booker in '82. A lot of times when he was the booker, and it was probably at times he would run the television, he would go to the TV. He was that Bill Dundee's the hardest worker I've ever seen. He was at that office, then leave the gym early and go to the office and go to the town. He would go to all the towns. He's one of the hardest working people I've ever seen. I learned my work ethic from Bill Dundee, and I really did. And Bill wasn't either like Jerry Lawler. Jerry Lawler can just sit down 20 minutes before a television show and write a hell of a television show. I disagree with Michael. Jerry Lawler was a very good booker for a short period of time because he would burn out quickly. He had some of the best business. 83 was the biggest money year, and he booked pretty much the whole year. Biggest money year Memphis Wrestling ever had. Not the biggest attendance year. He burned out, and Jerry Jarrett came in. I think Jerry would have probably would have rather had a longer period off, and it was a little over a year, but he saw what was happening, and he would hear from Eddie and different people, and he took back over. But certainly this is Bill Dundee. Bill Dundee served as the booker, but Jerry, he was at the office every day. He was at the office every day for sure, and he learned from the mentorship of Jerry Jarrett, and we want to certainly talk about Bill. In 1983, Bill left, and we were talking about I couldn't book Texas. Well, when Bill and part of that talent trade took the Midnight Express and Terry Taylor and the Rock and Roll Express went to Mid-South Wrestling, Bill was named the booker, but Bill Watts, as the owner, knew his territory. So he was involved at every TV. He was involved every time Bill Dundee sat and wrote the TV. He didn't mess with Bill, but he refined stuff based on, as you were talking about, Memphis is different. Well, you think Tulsa, Oklahoma, New Orleans, Louisiana, and Jackson, Mississippi, and Little Rock, Arkansas is different than what Bill was used to. So Watts didn't go away. Watts wasn't overbearing to Dundee. So all the Tennessee angles, the feathers, and the scaffold mats, flat roll battle royals, all that kind of stuff, Dundee suggested, but Watts refined it to fit to his territory. Bill Dundee, as the booker, did more money than any booker, including Watts, ever did in Louisiana. Groundbreaking. But he took every angle he saw in 8 years in Memphis, brought it with him, and Watts helped him fit that territory. And that's a magical story, Michael. When Bill
It is. It is. And I'm glad we're talking about Bill Dundee as a booker, because to me, if you give Jerry Jarrett the crown of booking, Bill Dundee has got to be the second in command as far as the booking, the brilliance of booking. And Bill, I don't know how well read he was as far as if you got a book, but I mean, when it comes to the creativity
was there. He's the best French guy I've ever seen in my life, by far. Better than me, better than Lawler, better than Jerry Jarrett. The actual details of a detailed finish, there's nobody I've ever known. And Jim Cornette, I'm sure you've heard him say this a million times on his podcast. Everybody thinks that from the early 80s for 10 years, the best finish man in wrestling was Bill Dundee, no doubt.
Oh, absolutely. And you got to realize, too, you're talking about that territory. Oklahoma City's in Little Rock, okay, there may be some similarity. New Orleans is a whole different world. New Orleans is God only knows what. You know, next to New York City, I think New Orleans is the most eclectic community or town, big city in America. I mean, New Orleans is out. Miami's probably down on that list, too, but certainly New Orleans next to New York. And it's a different world in New Orleans. He did all of his TV in Shreveport, which was sort of in the center. If you look at a map, draw a line from Oklahoma City to New Orleans, and from New Orleans to Jackson to Little Rock, Shreveport is almost kind of in the middle. And like you said, he would do TV 8 weeks in advance. So there was a brilliance, the creativity of Bill Dundee and the finished work of Bill Dundee and the mastermind of planning of Bill Watts, I think was a perfect combination.
And it was successful, the best business ever. And Pat, I was just wondering, is at the time when the Midnight and Dundee and Rock and Roll and Terry Taylor, all those guys, and Jim Cornette obviously was in, and he said that Jim Cornette says he got his master's degree of wrestling and running a wrestling company from Bill Watts. Were you watching Mid-South Wrestling back in the day? It wasn't so easy to get. Here we got Little Rock TV, so I saw every TV.
I didn't see a lot of it, but I went back. Actually, it's funny. I went back one weekend and got on YouTube and watched 3 years in a row. So yeah, I watched some of it, and then I picked up some from somewhere. Was it on ESPN or something at one point?
Yeah, Bob Pedicino had the show. When Pedicino had that Around the Territory show he did, he used to show Watts' territory all the time. And who was the old guy out of that was the announcer?
Lloyd Pierce.
Yes. But here's the thing too. Think about Bill Watts. Bill Watts make this comparison. Jerry Lawler, Bill Watts. Jerry Lawler, the king of Memphis, the man that's on top, can do no wrong. Bill Watts was that way in Oklahoma. Bill Watts' cast of characters when Dundee came in were all of these muscle-bound, former football player, big guy kind of things. And Bill worked with the fast, younger, speedier, quicker guys that were built like Bill. So he meshed the territory, and Watts, overseeing, was able to make it a great mixture. Instead of it being a culture clash, it was a great mixture. But also remember, Bill Watts would work. He was the Lawler of the territory. And you take that and you add the Junkyard Dog, you add some of those other talented people that were there with what Bill was doing, what Dundee was doing, what Bill Watts was overseeing. I could see it's not a surprise that it was the best business that the territory ever did.
Without a doubt in the world. And after,
that's a good point, Tony.
Followed by Terry Taylor and Dick Slater and Ken Mantell and different people, even Eddie Gilbert. But they had the oil crisis in Texas and Louisiana, and Bill Watts, who would have thought in 83 or 84, by 86, certainly, it would have been over. It would have been over, and we're not going to get to everybody. This will definitely, I think everybody agrees this needs to be at least a 2-part series, and we're going to go back to the same discussion, Michael and Pat, that we had with Robert Fuller, same sort of way. If we could go ahead and go to slide 5782, he was the assassin. He certainly, with Jody Hamilton, one of the greatest tag teams ever. They in the Carolinas, because the Carolinas already had the Assassins, so they were the great Bolos. He was just a fantastic, unbelievable heel, no doubt. Booking wise, he booked for Ann Gunkel and also for Jim Barnett. He was very successful in Georgia. He had a very successful run in Los Angeles, just mega business. Had a very successful run in Puerto Rico, just mega business. And Michael, before I continue this monologue on Tom Ernesto, I would say that considering what the territory was at the time in that late 70s, the last successful booker Nick Goulas had was Tom Ernesto. And certainly he got the Freebirds. It's a lot easier to get the talent over if they're God-given talents like Michael Hayes and Terry Gordy was. But my point, Michael, is I really think he was successful. And before I explain how he became the booker here, I want you, because you had experience working with Tom, and because on my list of great bookers overall, he would be on it. On my list of less successful bookers in Memphis history, not really understanding the territory, like you said, Memphis a lot different than Nashville and every place else. I would say for Memphis, he would be on my list of the worst bookers. Overall, I think he was genius. Now, talk personally about Tom Ernesto because I loved him, made trips with him, very nice to me, great guy. He just in Memphis. I think Jerry Jarrett got back involved before. I think Tom's smart enough. He was a very smart man, very smart. All those qualities you mentioned, he had them. I think they didn't give him time. I think Jarrett panicked, and Dutch has said this. They didn't give because Dutch was a big because he and Savage had the.
That's what I was going to bring up.
Tom, but so I'll let you talk now about Tom Ernesto.
Well, here's the deal with Tom Ernesto, and I agree with you. Nicest man, helped me a lot. I mean, I took his announcing job from him, and then he helped me create, do it the way that needed to be done to get it over. Here's the deal with Tom. Brilliant guy, great intelligence, a great, I think his biggest talent was he could find talent. He could spot talent. If he were a baseball scout, he'd be one of the top baseball scouts in America. If he was a football, if he was representing football players as a agent, he would be one of the top agents in America. Same way with wrestling. He brought Randy Savage and Dutch Mantell to Nashville. He brought who were the Freebirds, although they weren't allowed to be called the Freebirds, and they didn't want to be called the Freebirds, but Nick didn't want it. And so he brought them, and there was other talent at the same time, a bevy of talent. But here's the thing about Tom. Tom, behind the scenes, rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. In
Nashville.
Yes.
Okay.
And he just and part of it was that I always was told, and I was very young in the business at that time, so I didn't realize it until afterwards. And looking back, I could kind of see it. Tom sort of created some, I won't say animosity, but some waves in the locker room between the boys. And I think part of that was his style and the idea of if I get them to where they sort of think that they don't like each other, they're going to beat the hell out of each other in the ring. It's going to look a lot better. I think that was part of it. But the matches that he booked and put together with a young Randy Savage and a young Dutch Mantell, I can still remember. They were just all out. They were bar fights. They were just all out bar fights. There wasn't any wrestling to it. They just go in and beat the living crap out of each other. And after the match, they would be worse for wear because they literally beat the crap out of each other. But it was a great show, and it was a great match, and it was a great part of booking. But I think if there is a downside to Tom Ernesto, it was how to handle people and keeping the locker room a little bit on edge, if you would, whether it was the heel locker room or the babyface locker room. But as far as being a successful booker in Los Angeles and Atlanta and the places you met, absolutely for real.
Here's what I think is, first of all, I mentioned it with Robert Fuller. I don't think he ever developed a great relationship with Jerry Lawler. Bill Dundee was in Louisiana at the time, so that would have been another conflict. But again, I think that the reports that was given to Jerry Jarrett by people like Eddie Marlin and Randy West and Lawler and different people, I think Jerry Jarrett thought, well, I need to get in here. And they kept calling him the booker, but Tom had to go to that office every Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, and Jerry Jarrett was actually booking. Dutch to this day says that Tom, who he was very high with on, thought he was great. He said that he wasn't given the chance, so he was pretty much taken up for for Tom. On the people that we've talked about today, certainly I would say that I'd list as the best. I would say it was Jerry Jarrett. Then I would say the worst. I would I would I would pro- probably say, and we hadn't even talked about Lawler, and as Greg saying, not a good person. He was good uh, to me. He was nice to me, but I heard it from the Fabs, and I heard it from Lawler, and I heard it from uh, somebody else. Let me explain before I throw it back to you two guys as we wrap up this show, as we're at the 2 hour part of this show. I bet everybody's thinking, why all of a sudden did Tom Ernesto get the booking job? Well, Jerry Jarrett booked 83 and part of 84. Jerry Lawler did 83 and 84. Got burned out. Jerry Jarrett took over. Jerry wasn't ready to take over, so he did it for 2 or 3 months and gave it back to Lawler. In the meantime, Tom Ernesto, who had a great reputation, had just done great business in Los Angeles, kind of revived it a little bit, had a great run in Puerto Rico, had all these runs, and he called asking for a job, and Jerry Jarrett then hired him because obviously Lawler and Jarrett both wasn't setting the woods on fire in Memphis, and he thought new blood. So Tom Ernesto started March of 1985. And I kind of agree with Dutch that maybe if they gave Ernesto time to get used to the talent time to get used to Ernesto, maybe it would have been a different story. And I kind of agree that sometimes there's a time to pull the plug. Maybe Jarrett did it too early and he got involved. And here's Michael.
Do you think there is and I've heard this, and again, I'm just repeating what I heard, that there was a bit of animosity because there was, and I will call it the good old boy network, just because they had been and stayed in the territory for so long. And that was tantamount about the Memphis territory as well, and we haven't brought that up, is the talent that stayed in Memphis.
They would homestead. They homestead.
Exactly. So, I mean, that made the town even more difficult for an outsider to make a mark or make an impression. You look at Dundee, you look at Lawler, you look at Fargo. I mean, it goes back, Monroe. I mean, they were all hometown boys, if you would. So the hometown people, and Eddie Marlin was part of that. Tommy Gilbert was part of that. You can go down the list. All of a sudden, Tom comes in. Tom's an outsider, super successful, did great booking, has a great eye, ear, whatever for talent, gets into Memphis, doesn't do it the Memphis way, decides to do some different things, doesn't pop the house, doesn't pop the box office, is given a short rope. And I've seen that happen in our broadcast business. I've seen my mentor, Scott Shannon, went to Los Angeles. He had just he was number 1 in New York, worst to first in 63 days in New York City. In 1984, he goes to Los Angeles. He puts pirate radio on in 1988, and it bombs. Puts a billboard of his picture up on 100 billboards in Los Angeles with his picture, Scott Shannon in the morning, the pirate radio. And all the Mexicans are looking and yelling, El Diablo, El Diablo, El Diablo. They compared him to the devil. So, I mean, there's situations like that. I think Memphis may have been that kind of Achilles heel for Tom Ernesto. And I think Dutch may be right that if he were given more time, but he wasn't given more time because he was an outsider coming in.
Now, one person we didn't talk about, I skipped over. Adam, if you could find, and it was with the pictures of the Booker, the one right next to Jerry Jarrett is 5779, and we will go in detail next week of somebody that was so creative. He just wasn't a good detail guy, and he was a last minute guy. But some of the greatest creations, some great memories. Certainly, he booked his own programs, and there was no better person, including Jerry Jarrett, better at booking Jerry Lawler than Jerry Lawler. Nobody. and Jerry Jarrett got him over. But once he got over, certainly Lawler was very successful. And I want to go back to Pat now. Pat, I didn't give you the opportunity. I don't know if you read much on Tom Ernesto. I'm sure you know about the Assassins or about his book and thing, but I'm sure you can relate to. It might fit in one territory, but it might fit in another.
Well, and I met Tom Ernesto one time. He was on one of the shows I did as the assassin, but and I didn't know him as Tom Ernesto, but apparently I met him. But yeah, I'm sitting here thinking about this stuff, and I don't, I just, I ran a business for 26 years, and then I sold it to a bank that I work for now, and that bank had a group that did what we did, and so we merged into that group, and the guy that was running that group, they decided, early on. I mean, this was part of their plan to buy us, and then I would take that over because they felt like they needed to manage to. They felt like they needed to make a change in leadership, and it was very difficult. It was very difficult for the people, and it was very unfair to the people who had helped build the business that they had before I got there. You get hired by somebody, are told from the time you start working is you show loyalty to your employer, and then this guy comes in and he's your new boss, and who is this guy? And it was pretty much literally that. And I learned, and it took that was in March of 2022, and we're here in
20,
June of 2026. And it took over 3 years for us to become a team. And it's managing people is a hard thing. And that the Memphis territory. If you look at wrestling and the boys were probably making more money than they'd ever made, and then the new guy comes in, and it's a hard thing. It's a hard thing from everybody's perspective. And I guess as I sat here and you guys were a lot closer to all that and close to people than I am, but I was just sitting here for the last 10 minutes thinking about how tough it is when let's say you've got, and I'm gonna pick somebody. I mean, who's third from the top of the who's second on the who's second on the show. Who's next to the main event, and the new guy comes in, and next week you're third. Oh, what does that mean? Do I have to get out of here? And he's got his own guys and his way of doing. It's a tough thing. I'm surprised the wrestling business has survived doing that as well as it has.
And that's a perspective, Pat, that I always think you add to it. Sometimes me and Michael both can wrestling it to death too much, even though Michael also has the broadcasting and all that. I'm just have wrestling all over my brains. You get what you get. But Pat, with the business and the banking and with the experience that you have, it adds so much to the show for sure. I want to recap as we wind down, and then I have a question to both guys, and then sum up the shows. Today we talked about Buddy Fuller. We talked about Roy Welch. We talked about Jerry Jarrett, Robert Fuller, Bill Dundee. We talked about Tom Ernesto. We will start next week by talking. We certainly talked about Robert Fuller as well, and Bill Dundee, and everybody that we've talked to, Tom Ernesto, as we go through everybody, and starting with picture number 5783 on next week's show. No, we showed Lawler. We'll certainly talk about Lawler as well, but we'll talk about Eddie Hot Stuff Gilbert. Next picture. We'll talk about Eric Embry, his run. Two pictures next that we want to show. This is a young Randy Hills. Before I even was a ring announcer, I was a picture seller. And we'll talk a lot about mentors coming up. And you saw mine, and you saw what it ended up in the rehab hospital there, probably a month before he passed away. Me and Eddie Marlin. I get emotional when I talk about this man for sure. We'll also talk next week about Eric Embry, and that was picture 5788. 5788 was Eric Embry. Certainly, we talked about me. Dutch Mantell was the last booker of the USWA. We will dive in to that certainly for sure next week. And bookers in other territories, we will talk next week, starting at picture 5789 and going right through it. We'll talk about San Francisco's Roy Shire, who Bill Watts learned from. We will talk about the great Eddie Graham, known as one of the best finished men in wrestling. Who learned from him was Cowboy Bill Watts. Cowboy Bill Watts. Another person who learned from Eddie Graham was Bill Watts. Another person, our next picture is the American Dream, Dusty Rhodes. Another person learning from Eddie Graham was Kevin Sullivan. A person that learned from Jerry Jarrett, Bill Dundee, Jerry Lawler, and Cowboy Bill Watts was Jim Cornette. In the WWF, you have to mention Pat Patterson. Pat Patterson, great booker. The next picture, of course, love him or hate him, certainly you can't knock the success. You can knock the success of how wrestling ended up with Vince McMahon. The next picture, Pat, you told the story on how he gave a finish, is Ole Anderson. Next picture, after that, is Paul Heyman, created ECW, student of the game. The next picture, we talk about two Fullers. We'll talk about the other. The Tennessee Ron Fuller. I love Knoxville. I love Birmingham. Ron is brilliant. A booker at times, a partner at times was Bob Armstrong. So a lot to look forward to next week. And I will end, Pat, go back to you real quick of just the people we've talked about today in detail. Give me, and I think it'll be unanimous, the best booker in Memphis wrestling history. And we talked about today the least successful booker in Memphis wrestling territory. Let's end. Then your last take.
Well, I think Jarrett obviously, and I think Tom Ernesto, rightly or wrongfully, has kind of gone down as the biggest mistake that was made there. One thing when you were talking about, and this is I read a lot, and I don't read as much as I need to anymore, and I used to read a lot, but odd things will stick with me all my life. And when you were going through all those bookers, and I was seeing everybody, who did Eddie Graham influence? He influenced Jerry. Jerry Jarrett talked about Eddie Graham all the time.
Yeah.
And all of that. One thing I read that made a big impact on me, when you think about, somebody's great. Floyd Patterson, who was a world champion, when he was a teenager, he carried Joe Louis's robe. And so it goes,
And so it goes.
And and Floyd Patterson never gets the credit of being a brilliant man. He later got into the government in New York and ran the sports commission in New York State. He was commissioner of the New York State Athletic Commission and then the commissioner of the state as well. Floyd Patterson was a brilliant brilliant champion that people didn't realize that when he lost his fight to Sonny Liston.
Yeah.
Are you looking forward to next week's show?
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
There's a list there. So, Michael, you need to say your worst, and you need to recap the show. And I might say this: this is the second week in a row I feel real strong about the show. I appreciate Tony on last week. He volunteered to come on today, and certainly he will be back in the future. I knew the show, and we're going overtime. On today, I knew that would be the case, and I got part one. And Michael, you're best booker, least successful booker, and I am as fired up can be, because I think we're back to our roots. And with the Randy West idea that we may have to put off how long part two of Bookers last, then the greatest nights in Memphis wrestling history will be coming up. We're back to our roots with our discussion and really digging in and not rushing and not having videos. And I think we're teaching a great booker who you think had the least, and your thoughts on the show today and what you learned today.
Well, first of all, I love the show today, and I think Pat had some of the most brilliant comments, because he's a little bit on the outside coming on the inside, and I think he opens the whole door to what the fans are thinking and the folks that are watching are thinking. So, Pat, great job today, and I know you're under the weather. When I see that you haven't shaved in a day or so, I know you're under the weather.
I haven't shaved in over a week, so I'm I've been going in the office the last couple of days, and I'm waiting to see somebody notice.
Did you take that lead from Richard Crushy?
No. My godson's getting married this weekend, so I'm sure I'll shave it. Friday.
Who is that? Is that somebody I know?
No. This is my friend from graduate school.
Well, just FYI, the best booker, let's hands down, we'll give it a crowning. It's done. It's Jerry Jarrett. There's no doubt about it in the Memphis territory. Is he the best booker nationwide? Open for debate, but I think he's in the running. Worst booker, I'm going to go with Robert Fuller, because I think Robert was young. He was learning. He was coming off of a win in Knoxville. He gets put into a position that he can't go. He has a minuscule chance of improving, but a large chance of failing. And I think because of that, that's why I would put him in that situation.
Hey, I just wanted to add this. I wasn't planning this. Tony Richards is watching the show today. Michael, I want you, I know you don't particularly like doing this, but it's relevant here as we were talking about Tom Ernesto and Tony Richards, who's the great historian. And I did not know this. And Michael, will you do the honors of reading this?
And I'll be honest with you, I knew about the investigation, but I didn't know Ernesto was one of the witnesses. That's a new one on me. Good job. And I'm telling you, Tony's brilliant. I mean,
go ahead and read it, Michael.
We're lucky to have him put in things like this. Tom Ernesto was one of the wrestlers who testified in the 55-56 investigation of the National Wrestling Alliance. He said, I've read all the DOJ transcripts of that testimony. That was wasn't that I got to think of the word. Hold on. That was an investigation where they said that the NWA was not allowing other competition. Monopoly. That's the word. Yes. Yeah. That was that they had created a monopoly among the sport of wrestling.
And it could have killed the NWA. And it could have.
Well, keep this in mind, too. The idea when that came up, Congress was on a witch hunt back then, because that was about the time just after the Kefauver hearings and the Red Scare and all that stuff. They were looking to beat up some corporations or some groups, and the NWA fell prey to that. That's one thing that Sam Munchnick did not like to talk about. Brought it up one time. He got very upset.
Really, that's for sure. What are you most looking forward to talking about next week?
Joining my friends and doing it all over again. I mean, we're on a roll. Let's go.
All right. I'm fired up too. Pat, I hope you feel better. You get some rest and and get back into the swing of things. And we
I'll
hope to
do.
see you here in Arkansas fairly soon. Except the last time you came to Arkansas was because of a funeral. I hope you don't have to do that.
Well, that's true. That's true. All right,
Another
guys.
thing Tony says that I did not know, so we learned from Tony, was Tom Renesto was Jim Crockett Sr.'s driver. That's interesting, Michael.
That is good. That's good. And of course, a great one half of the Assassins. All right. That's going to do it, right?
Yeah,
We're out of here.
I'll get us out of here. I thank you, Michael. I thank Pat Trammell. I thank Adam Dunn for producing. I thank Randy West for giving me ideas for future shows. And certainly, again, Adam makes us all look great, and I appreciate that. For Pat Trammell and Michael St. John, good night, everybody. We're talking Memphis Wrestling. Good night, Tony.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you all, guys. Appreciate you being here.